The chainsaw kicked back hard, its chain catching on a knot in the Douglas fir. Red fluid sprayed across Clyde Falco's safety glasses as the saw's handle slammed into his forearm, tearing through his work shirt and flesh. 20 feet below, his logging crew shouted warnings, but Clyde didn't hear them. He was already climbing higher up the trunk, one-handed, his injured arm leaving crimson streaks on the bark. "Falco, get down here!" Tommy Briggs yelled from the ground. "You're bleeding all over creation!" But Clyde wasn't coming down, not until he secured the Widowmaker, a massive dead branch hanging 40 feet up that could eliminate someone if it fell wrong. The logging foreman had called it a two-man job, but Clyde worked alone when it mattered. He always had. Crimson dripped steadily as he reached the danger zone. The branch was bigger than he'd thought, 8 inches thick and heavy with rot. One wrong move and it would take him down with it. He positioned his saw carefully, feeling the familiar weight of the Husqvarna in his good hand. The engine roared to life, 3 precise cuts. The branch fell clean, crashing through the lower canopy before hitting the forest floor with a sound like thunder. The crew below erupted in cheers and applause. Clyde didn't acknowledge them. He rappelled down the trunk methodically, his boots finding purchase on each section of bark. When he reached the ground, Tommy was waiting with a first aid kit. "You crazy son of a tool," Tommy said, shaking his head. "Could have eliminated yourself up there." "Could have eliminated someone down here if I hadn't," Clyde replied, examining the gash on his forearm. It was deep but clean. He'd had worse. Tommy's radio crackled. He stepped away to answer it, his voice dropping to a whisper. Clyde caught fragments. "Yeah, she called. Told me to tell him. Tonight at the party." Something cold settled in Clyde's stomach. Delilah never called the work site. Never. Tommy walked back over, his face carefully neutral. "That was your wife. She wants you at that company thing tonight. Says it's important." Clyde nodded and started packing his gear. He'd been married to Delilah for 18 years. He knew her voice patterns, her tells, her lies. Tommy was holding something back. The drive home from the logging site took 40 minutes on winding mountain roads. Clyde used the time to think. Delilah worked for Cascade Water Rights, a lobbying firm that specialized in environmental law. Big money, big politics, big egos. Her boss, Julian Varnes, was the kind of man who wore $1,000 suits to coffee meetings and called everyone chief or sport. Clyde had never liked Julian, but that wasn't unusual. He didn't like most of Delilah's corporate friends. They talked too much and said too little. They smiled with their mouths, but not their eyes. They made jokes about his calloused hands and flannel shirts when they thought he couldn't hear. But Delilah had changed since working for Julian. She stayed late more often. She bought new clothes. She started going to the gym at 6 in the morning instead of after work. Little things that might mean nothing, or everything. The house was empty when he arrived. Delilah had left a note on the kitchen counter. "Shower and change. Party starts at 7. Don't be late. D. No love you. No see you soon. Just instructions." Clyde showered and bandaged his arm properly. The cut would heal in a week. He'd had practice with worse injuries. Logging was dangerous work, but it was honest work. You cut trees, they fell down, you got paid. Simple cause and effect. No politics, no backstabbing, no games. He put on his only good shirt, a blue Oxford Delilah had bought him for Christmas, and his least faded jeans. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. 44 years old, 6'2", 190 pounds of muscle and scar tissue. Gray threading through his brown hair. Lines around his eyes from squinting into sawdust and sunlight. He looked like what he was. A working man who'd never pretended to be anything else. The party was at the Riverside Hotel downtown. Clyde arrived 15 minutes late, which was early for him. He hated being early to social events. Gave him too much time to think about how he didn't belong. The ballroom was full of lawyers, lobbyists, and politicians, men in tailored suits and women in cocktail dresses, the kind of people who made decisions about other people's lives from climate-controlled offices. He spotted Delilah across the room immediately. She was wearing a black dress he'd never seen before. Her blonde hair was styled differently, shorter, more sophisticated. She was laughing at something Julian Varnes was saying, her hand resting on his arm. Clyde walked to the bar and ordered a beer. The bartender gave him a look that said he should have ordered wine or scotch, but brought him a bottle of Budweiser anyway. "Clyde!" He turned to see Martha Henderson approaching. She was Delilah's closest friend at the firm, a paralegal with political ambitions and a talent for remembering everyone's name. "So glad you could make it," Martha said, though her smile looked forced. "Delilah wasn't sure you'd come." "Here I am," Clyde said. Yes, here you are. Martha glanced toward Delilah and Julian, then back at Clyde. How's the logging business? Trees keep growing. I keep cutting them down. Martha laughed, but it sounded nervous. Well, I should go mingle, enjoy the party. She walked away quickly, leaving Clyde alone at the bar. He watched the room, noting the clusters of conversation, the way people moved and positioned themselves. It wasn't so different from the logging site, really. Everyone had their role, their place in the hierarchy. The difference was that here, the dangerous work was done with words instead of chainsaws. He saw Delilah moving through the crowd, Julian always nearby. They made a good-looking couple, both tall, both polished, both comfortable in this world of wine and small talk. Clyde finished his beer and walked toward their table. Several other couples were seated there, people he recognized from previous company events. David and Karen something, both lawyers. Paul from accounting and his wife. A city councilman whose name Clyde couldn't remember. Clyde? Delilah's voice was bright and cheerful, but her eyes were wary. Everyone, my husband is here. Polite nods and hellos. Clyde took the empty chair next to Delilah. Julian was sitting directly across from him, close enough that their knees almost touched under the table. How's the Paul Bunyan business? Julian asked with a grin. He'd made the same joke at every party for 2 years. Good, Clyde said. How's the talking people out of their water rights business? Julian's grin faltered slightly. We prefer to call it environmental consulting. I'm sure you do. Delilah put her hand on Clyde's arm, the injured one. He winced slightly, and she pulled back, noticing the bandage for the first time. What happened? She asked. Chainsaw kickback, nothing serious. You should be more careful, Julian said. Workplace injuries can be very expensive. Not if you know what you're doing, Clyde replied. The conversation moved on to safer topics, the weather, local politics, the firm's recent successes. Clyde listened without participating, nursing his second beer. Under the table, he felt Delilah's leg brush against his. A peace offering, maybe, or habit. Then he noticed her other leg. It was pressed against Julian's thigh. Not accidentally, deliberately. And as Clyde watched from the corner of his eye, Delilah's hand slipped below the table edge. Clyde's vision narrowed. Time seemed to slow. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, could feel the blood rushing to his face. Across the table, Julian's expression changed subtly. A slight flush, a barely contained smile. Delilah was stroking Julian's leg. Maybe more than his leg. Their eyes met across the table. Julian's face went from smug satisfaction to shock to fear in the space of 2 seconds. He'd realized that Clyde knew. Delilah felt the change in tension. She looked at her husband, saw his expression, and followed his gaze down to where her hand was still moving under the table. Her face went white. Clyde, she started. One move, Clyde said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence around their table. And your lover loses his balls. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope, set it on the table in front of Delilah. Divorce papers, he said. Signed and filed this morning. The table erupted. Julian pushed back so hard his chair toppled over. Delilah grabbed for the envelope, but Clyde caught her wrist. I wouldn't, he said. You son of a witch, Julian snarled, but he stayed on his feet, well away from the table. Clyde, please, Delilah whispered. Can we talk about this privately? We're done talking, Clyde said. He stood up, straightening his jacket. Around them, the entire ballroom had gone quiet. 50 conversations had stopped mid-sentence. Security, Julian shouted. 2 hotel security guards started moving toward the table. Clyde waited until they were close, then walked calmly toward the exit. He didn't run. He didn't rush. He walked like a man who had somewhere else to be. Behind him, he heard Delilah calling his name, her voice breaking. He didn't turn around. The next morning, Clyde discovered that all their joint bank accounts had been frozen. Their credit cards had been canceled. The title to his pickup truck, which he'd thought was paid off, was apparently held by Cascade Water Rights as some kind of corporate lease arrangement he'd never heard of. Delilah had been busy, but Clyde had been busy too. He'd spent 3 weeks before the party documenting everything. Bank records, credit card statements, property deeds, insurance policies. He'd hired a lawyer, not some smooth-talking corporate type like Julian, but a former prosecutor named Maura Garrow, who specialized in asset recovery and white-collar crime. Maura was a small woman with steel gray hair and eyes like winter. She'd spent 15 years putting rich people in prison before switching to private practice. Her office was spartanly furnished. No expensive art, no mahogany desk, just file cabinets and law books, and a computer that never stopped printing. Your wife made a mistake, Maura told him during their second meeting. She moved too fast, freezing the accounts, canceling the cards. It looks like retaliation. And this truck situation? If she used corporate funds or corporate credit to make payments on a personal vehicle, that's embezzlement. How much trouble is she in? Clyde asked. Depends how deep we dig, Maura said, and how much you want to hurt her. I want her to understand that I'm not someone she can push around. Maura smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Then we're going to get along just fine. Clyde moved out of the house that weekend. He found a small cabin 20 miles up the mountain, accessible only by logging roads. The owner was an old-timer named Pete Sorensen who'd worked the forest for 40 years before retiring. He rented the place for cash, no questions asked. The cabin was basic, one room, wood stove, no phone, no internet. Electricity came from a gas generator. Water came from a well. It suited Clyde perfectly. He quit his job at the logging company on Monday morning, gave his foreman 2 weeks' notice, and worked every day, saying nothing about his personal situation. His crew knew something was wrong. Clyde had always been quiet, but now he was silent. He did his work, collected his pay, and disappeared into the woods each evening. On his last day, Tommy Briggs pulled him aside. "Whatever's going on," Tommy said. "If you need anything." "I'm good," Clyde said. "You sure? Because you look like a man who's planning something." Clyde shouldered his gear bag. "I'm always planning something, Tommy. That's how you stay alive in this business." He drove away from the logging site for the last time, but he didn't go home to the cabin. Instead, he drove to the Riverside Hotel. Julian's BMW was in the parking lot. Clyde waited. At 11:30, Julian emerged from the hotel with Delilah on his arm. They were laughing about something, walking close together like lovers do. Julian opened the passenger door for her, a gentleman's gesture that made Clyde's jaw clench. They drove to Julian's house in the hills above town, a modern place with lots of glass and steel, the kind of architecture that screamed, "Look how successful I am." Clyde parked on the street and watched them go inside. The lights stayed on until almost 2 a.m. Clyde didn't need to see more. He drove back to the cabin and spent the rest of the night sharpening his chainsaws. It was meditative work, the rasp of metal on metal, the precise angle required for the perfect edge. By dawn, every blade in his collection was razor sharp. Maura called him Tuesday morning with an update. "We found something interesting," she said. "Your wife's been using the company credit card for personal expenses. Hotel rooms, restaurant bills, shopping trips. About $12,000 over the past 6 months. Is that illegal?" "It's definitely against company policy. And since she signed an ethics agreement when she was hired, it's grounds for immediate termination." "What about Julian?" "Harder to prove, but we're working on it. Corporate executives have more leeway with expense accounts. But if we can show a pattern of personal use specifically related to the affair..." "Keep digging," Clyde said. "There's something else. The prenup you signed when you got married? Delilah's lawyer included a clause that gives you partial ownership of any business assets she acquires during the marriage, including stock options." Clyde was quiet for a moment. "How much stock does she have in the firm?" "About 8%. Not controlling interest, but enough to cause problems if it went to someone unfriendly." "Someone like me." "Someone exactly like you." Clyde hung up and drove into town. He parked across the street from Cascade Water Rights and watched the building for 3 hours. Delilah's Lexus was in the parking garage. Julian's BMW was in the reserved space closest to the entrance. They thought they were safe. They thought they'd won. They were wrong. That afternoon, Clyde visited an electronics store and purchased 4 trail cameras, the kind hunters use to monitor game paths. He also bought a portable hard drive and a laptop computer. The clerk assumed he was planning a hunting trip and helpfully explained how to set up the motion detection features. "These babies will catch anything that moves," the clerk said. "Day or night, rain or shine. Memory cards hold about a week of footage before they start overwriting." "Perfect," Clyde said. He spent the rest of the week learning how the cameras worked, how to position them for optimal coverage, how to retrieve and download the footage. It wasn't complicated, simpler than operating a chainsaw, really. Just point, click, and wait. Julian's house was surrounded by trees, which made Clyde's job easier. He knew how to move through forests without making noise, how to climb trees without disturbing the wildlife, how to hide things where they wouldn't be found. The first camera went in a Douglas fir that overlooked the back deck. The second covered the front entrance. The third monitored the garage. The fourth he positioned to watch the bedroom window. He was back in his cabin by midnight, feeling satisfied with the night's work. The cameras ran for 2 weeks before Clyde checked them. When he finally downloaded the footage, he found exactly what he'd expected. Hours of Julian and Delilah acting like a married couple in Julian's house, cooking together, swimming in the pool, sleeping in the same bed. But he also found something he hadn't expected. On the second Tuesday night, Delilah and Julian had invited friends over for dinner. The camera facing the back deck had captured most of their conversation, including a 30-minute segment where they discussed Clyde. "He's probably living in some trailer park, feeling sorry for himself," Julian said, refilling wine glasses around the patio table. "You don't know Clyde," Delilah replied. "He's not the type to feel sorry for himself." "What type is he then?" asked one of the dinner guests, a woman Clyde recognized as a city council member. "Dangerous," Delilah said without hesitation. "He thinks before he acts. He plans things out. That's what makes him good at his job, and it's what makes him scary as an ex-husband." "You're worried about him?" Julian asked. "I'm worried about what he might do when he finds out about the money." "What money?" the council member asked. Delilah and Julian exchanged a look. "The prenup had a clause," Delilah explained. "If either of us acquired significant assets during the marriage, the other spouse gets a percentage. I thought my lawyer had removed it before I got my stock options, but..." "But what?" Julian pressed. "But I forgot to file the amendment, which means Clyde technically owns 8% of Cascade water rights." The dinner guests went quiet. Julian's face went white. "How much is 8% worth?" someone asked. "About $1.2 million, Julian said. Clyde rewound that section and played it 3 more times, making sure he'd heard correctly. Then he called Maura. "We need to meet," he said. "When?" "Now." They met at Maura's office. She made coffee while Clyde set up the laptop and played the relevant footage. "This is extremely valuable," Maura said when the video ended. "But how did you obtain it?" "The cameras were on public property," Clyde said. "I checked." It wasn't entirely true. One camera had been in a tree that overhung Julian's property line. But Maura didn't need to know that. "Even if the recording is admissible," Maura said, "we need to be careful how we use it. If we move too aggressively, they'll claim maltreatment." "What do you suggest?" "We wait. Let them think they're safe for a little while longer. Meanwhile, we prepare the paperwork to claim your stock ownership. When the time is right, we hit them with everything at once." "How long?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. There's a big firm event coming up, Cascade's annual gala. They're expecting some kind of environmental award from the state. Lots of publicity, lots of important people." "Sounds like the perfect time to make a statement," Clyde said. Maura smiled her cold smile. "I was hoping you'd say that." Clyde spent the next 2 weeks preparing. He researched the gala, studied the guest list, learned the layout of the hotel where it would be held. He also made some purchases, a good suit, a hidden camera system, and a powerful projector that could connect wirelessly to a laptop. He practiced his presentation until he could do it in his sleep, practiced his timing until every movement was automatic, practiced his speech until every word carried the weight he intended. He also sent an anonymous package to the corporate compliance office at Cascade Water Rights. The package contained printed copies of Delilah's credit card statements, highlighted to show personal expenses charged to the company account. He included a note, "Thought you should know what your employees are doing with shareholder money." The gala was held at the Grand Marquis Hotel, the fanciest venue in the city. Red carpet, photographers, women in evening gowns, and men in tuxedos. The kind of event that made the society pages of the local newspaper. Clyde arrived early, dressed in his new suit. He looked different. Professional, respectable, like someone who belonged at fancy parties. The hotel staff didn't give him a second glance as he set up his equipment in the AV booth overlooking the ballroom. The projectionist was a college kid who was more interested in his phone than his job. When Clyde offered him $200 to take a cigarette break, the kid jumped at the chance. "Just keep an eye on things for 10 minutes, Clyde said. "Make sure nobody touches the controls." The kid nodded and disappeared, leaving Clyde alone with the presentation system that controlled every screen in the ballroom. Clyde connected his laptop to the main console and tested the connection. Perfect. He could broadcast to the massive LED wall behind the stage, the smaller screens positioned around the room, and even the monitors in the hotel lobby. Then he went downstairs to join the party. The ballroom was packed. Clyde estimated 300 people, maybe more. Politicians, business leaders, environmental activists, reporters. The cream of the city's elite, all gathered to celebrate Cascade Water Rights' latest achievement. He found Delilah near the stage, radiant in a silver evening gown. Julian was beside her, looking proud and confident. They were holding court with a group of state legislators, probably discussing future contracts. Clyde watched from across the room, sipping club soda and checking his watch. The award presentation was scheduled for 9 o'clock. It was 8:45. At 8:50, he excused himself and headed for the restroom. But instead of going to the men's room, he took the service elevator back to the AV booth. The college kid was still on his smoke break. The booth was empty and dark, overlooking the brightly lit ballroom below. Clyde sat down at the control console and opened his laptop. On stage, the master of ceremonies was introducing the evening's honored guests. In 2 minutes, he would introduce Julian Varnes, who would accept the Environmental Stewardship Award on behalf of Cascade Water Rights. Clyde's finger hovered over the enter key. One keystroke and everything would change. For him, for Delilah, for Julian, for everyone in that ballroom. There would be no going back. He thought about 18 years of marriage. 18 years of coming home to the same house, eating dinner at the same table, sleeping in the same bed. 18 years of believing that loyalty meant something, that promises mattered, that love was more than just a word people said. He thought about Delilah's hand under the table, touching another man, her laugh at Julian's jokes, her smile when she looked at him across the restaurant table. He thought about their daughter Ruby away at college, who still called Delilah every Sunday and thought her parents had the perfect marriage. Clyde pressed enter. The first image that appeared on the LED wall was a close-up of Delilah and Julian kissing on his back deck. The crowd gasped. Someone screamed. The second image showed them in bed together, Julian's face clearly visible as he pulled Delilah closer. The third was a video clip, audio included, of their conversation about the prenup and the stock options. "I forgot to file the amendment," Delilah's voice echoed through the ballroom sound system, which means Clyde technically owns 8% of Cascade Water Rights. Chaos erupted. People were pointing at the screens, shouting at each other, pulling out their phones to record the spectacle. On stage, the master of ceremonies was frantically gesturing to someone off stage to cut the feed, but Clyde had control of the system. He cycled through 12 more images and 3 more video clips before anyone figured out how to override him. By then, it was too late. Half the audience had recorded the show on their phones. The other half were already posting about it on social media. Clyde packed up his laptop and walked calmly toward the exit. He passed Julian in the lobby, surrounded by reporters, and looking like a man who'd just watched his life explode. "No comment," Julian was saying. "No comment, no comment, no comment." He saw Clyde walking past and broke away from the reporters. "You son of a witch," Julian snarled, grabbing Clyde's arm. Clyde looked down at Julian's hand, then back up at his face. "Let go," he said quietly. "You've ruined everything," Julian said, but he didn't let go. So Clyde punched him. It wasn't a wild punch or an angry swing. It was a precise, controlled blow that caught Julian on the point of his chin and dropped him like a falling tree. Julian hit the marble floor hard and didn't get up. The reporters went crazy, cameras flashing, questions flying. Hotel security came running. In the distance, Clyde could hear sirens approaching. "Sir, you need to come with us," one of the security guards said. "I understand," Clyde replied. He allowed them to escort him to a small office off the lobby, where they waited for the police. 2 hours later, he was released without charges. Julian had decided not to press attack charges, probably because his lawyers had explained that filing a complaint would keep the story in the news cycle. Clyde drove back to his cabin and slept better than he had in months. The next morning brought phone calls, reporters wanting interviews, lawyers wanting to represent him, former friends wanting to know if the rumors were true. Clyde ignored them all. The only call that mattered came from Maura. "It worked," she said. "Cascade's board of directors held an emergency meeting this morning. They've suspended Julian pending an investigation. They've also suspended Delilah for misuse of company funds." "What about my stock?" "We filed the claim yesterday afternoon while everyone was distracted by the gala. The board has to recognize your ownership under the original prenup terms. 8% of the company worth approximately $1.2 million at current valuation. And if I wanted to sell those shares, there are several interested buyers. Cascade has some valuable water rights contracts that other firms would love to acquire. Your shares might be worth more than we initially thought." Clyde was quiet for a moment, processing the information. "There's something else," Maura continued. "Someone sent an anonymous tip to the State Attorney General's office about Julian's previous employment. Apparently, this isn't the first time he's been involved in workplace relationships that violated company policy." "How bad?" 3 previous companies, 4 different women, 2 maltreatment settlements that were sealed by non-disclosure agreements. If the story gets out, Julian loses everything. Julian loses everything, Maura confirmed. That afternoon, Delilah called. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice sounded hollow, defeated. "No," Clyde said, and hung up. She called back immediately. "Please," she said. "Just 5 minutes." "No." "Clyde, I'm begging you." He almost hung up again. Almost. But something in her tone stopped him. "2 minutes," he said. "Thank you." He could hear her crying. "I know you hate me. I know I deserve it. But please don't take Ruby away from me." Ruby's 18 years old. She can make her own decisions. She won't even take my calls. She saw the news, saw the pictures. That's not my problem. It could be our problem. She's talking about dropping out of college, says she can't face her friends. She wants to come home. Clyde felt something cold settle in his stomach. Ruby was supposed to graduate next spring with a degree in environmental science. She'd worked too hard to throw it all away because of her mother's mistakes. "Where is she now?" he asked. "Portland. She's staying with my sister until she figures out what to do next." "Your sister who thinks I'm a knuckle-dragging redneck?" "Yes." "Perfect." Clyde was quiet for a moment. "I'll talk to Ruby, but you and I are done." "I know. And if you ever contact me again, for any reason, I'll make the gala look like a friendly conversation." "I know." He hung up and immediately called Ruby's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. He tried 3 more times with the same result. Finally, he sent a text. "It's Dad. Call me when you're ready to talk." She called back an hour later. "Hey, Dad," she said. Her voice sounded small and young, like she was 12 years old again. "Hey, kiddo. How are you holding up?" "I've been better." She was quiet for a moment. "Is it true? All of it?" "Yeah, it's true." "How long did you know?" "I suspected for a while. I confirmed it a few weeks ago." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wasn't your problem to solve." Ruby started crying then, not the dramatic sobs of a teenager, but the quiet tears of someone whose world had just collapsed. "I don't know what to do," she said. "Everyone's talking about it. The pictures are everywhere. I can't go back to school like nothing happened." "Yes, you can," Clyde said firmly, "because what your mother did has nothing to do with who you are or what you're capable of. But people will stare. They'll whisper. Let them. You're stronger than gossip, Ruby. You always have been. I want to come home." "Home where? The house is part of the divorce proceedings. Your mother's probably going to lose her job, and I'm living in a one-room cabin with no cell service. I don't care. I just want to be with family." "I am family. But family doesn't mean giving up on your dreams because other people made bad choices." They talked for another hour. Clyde told her about the legal situation, about the stock ownership, about his plans for the future. He didn't mention Julian's maltreatment history or the possibility that more revelations were coming. "Will you be okay?" Ruby asked finally. "I'll be fine. I always am." "Will Mom be okay?" That was harder to answer. "I don't know, kiddo. That's up to her." Ruby decided to stay in school, at least until the end of the semester. Clyde promised to visit her in 2 weeks after the legal situation settled down. The situation settled down faster than he'd expected. Julian resigned from Cascade Water Rights on Thursday morning, citing personal reasons. By Thursday afternoon, he'd left town. By Friday, his house was on the market. Delilah lasted until Monday. The board terminated her employment, effective immediately, after the compliance investigation confirmed misuse of company funds. The amount wasn't enough for criminal charges, but it was enough to destroy her reputation in the tight-knit world of environmental law. Maura called Tuesday morning with an offer. "Pacific Northwest Water Management wants to buy your shares," she said. "They're willing to pay $1.8 million. That's more than we estimated. Cascade is in chaos. The board is panicking. Your shares could tip the balance if there's a hostile takeover attempt." "Sell them?" Clyde said. "All of them? Every last share. I don't want any connection to that company." The paperwork took 3 days to complete. When it was done, Clyde had $1.8 million in a bank account and no legal ties to his former life. He used some of the money to pay Ruby's tuition through graduation. He gave Maura a substantial bonus for her excellent work. He bought a new truck, a Ford F-250 with enough room for all his equipment. The rest he invested in a logging operation up north, near the Canadian border. Remote country, clean air, honest work. No corporate politics, no backstabbing, no games. But before he left town, he had one more piece of business to finish. Martha Henderson had called him 3 times, wanting to meet for coffee and clear the air about what had happened. Clyde had ignored the calls until she left a voicemail saying she had information about Delilah that he deserved to know. They met at a diner outside town, the kind of place where truckers stopped for coffee and pie. Martha looked nervous, fidgeting with her purse and checking her phone every few minutes. "Thank you for coming," she said when Clyde sat down across from her. "What do you want, Martha?" "I want to apologize for not telling you sooner, for letting you walk into that party blind." "You knew?" "I suspected. We all suspected. But nobody wanted to say anything because..." "Because what?" "Because Julian was powerful, and Delilah was our friend." Clyde ordered coffee and waited for her to continue. "There's something else," Martha said. "About the night you confronted them at the party. Delilah called me afterward crying, saying you'd humiliated her. She wanted me to help her get back at you." "How?" "She wanted me to tell people that you'd been abusive during the marriage, that she'd been afraid of you for years, that the affair was her way of escape." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her she was crazy. I told her that kind of lie would destroy more than just your reputation. It would destroy Ruby's relationship with both of you." Martha pulled a manila envelope from her purse and slid it across the table. "These are the text messages she sent me that night. I thought you should have them, in case she tries to spread those lies later." Clyde opened the envelope and read the printed messages. Delilah's desperation was obvious in every line. She'd wanted Martha to lie for her, to fabricate stories of domestic violence and emotional misuse. "Why are you showing me this?" Clyde asked. "Because I've known you for 10 years, and I've never seen you raise your voice, let alone your hand. Because Delilah's behavior that night showed me who she really is. And because you deserve to know the truth about the people in your life." Clyde folded the messages and put them back in the envelope. "I appreciate this," he said, "but I'm done with all of it. Done with Delilah. Done with her friends. Done with this whole mess." "What will you do now?" "Work. Somewhere far from here." Martha nodded. "For what it's worth, I think you handled everything better than most men would have." "I handled it the only way I knew how." He left $20 on the table and walked out of the diner. In the parking lot, he threw Martha's envelope in a trash bin. He didn't need insurance against Delilah's lies. He was leaving, and lies couldn't follow him into the mountains. 2 weeks later, Clyde was loading his truck outside the cabin when a silver Lexus came up the dirt road. He recognized the car immediately, but he didn't stop packing. Delilah got out slowly, like she was approaching a dangerous animal. She looked terrible, thinner, pale, her hair limp and unwashed, designer clothes that hung loose on her shrinking frame. "Hello, Clyde," she said. He continued loading boxes into the truck bed. "You're trespassing." "I know. I won't stay long." "You won't stay at all." He picked up a toolbox and hefted it into the truck. "Get back in your car and drive away." "I came to apologize." "Not interested." "And to tell you that I'm leaving town, too." That made him pause. He turned to face her for the first time. "Where?" "My sister in Portland offered me a job. Receptionist at her real estate office. It's not much, but it's all you can get now." Delilah flinched. "Yes." "Good." They stood there in the mountain silence, former spouses who'd become strangers. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermal currents between the peaks. "I know you won't forgive me," Delilah said finally. "I'm not asking for that, but I need you to know that I never meant for it to go this far." "How far did you mean for it to go?" "I don't know. I thought you'd fight for me. I thought you'd get angry and yell and demand that I choose. I never thought you'd just walk away." "You thought wrong. I know that now." Clyde picked up another box. "Is there a point to this conversation?" "Ruby called me yesterday. She said you're buying a logging operation up north." "What about it?" "She wants to visit you this summer, work for you for a few months before her senior year." "That's between me and Ruby." "I'm just asking. Please don't turn her against me completely. She's the only good thing that came out of our marriage." Clyde set down the box and really looked at his ex-wife. She was broken, hollowed out, a shadow of the confident woman who'd seduced her boss and destroyed her own life. "Ruby makes her own decisions," he said. "If she wants a relationship with you, that's her choice. If she doesn't, That's also her choice. I won't poison her against you, but I won't help you either. That's fair. It's more than fair. Delilah nodded and walked back toward her car. Then she stopped. Clyde? What? The logging operation? Is it what you really want? Or are you just running away? He thought about that for a moment. About chainsaws and falling trees and the smell of sawdust. About honest work in clean country, far from the politics and games of corporate life. It's what I want, he said. Good. You deserve to be happy. She got in her car and drove away without looking back. Clyde finished loading the truck and drove north toward his new life. The logging operation was called Cascade Timber, ironic considering where he'd come from, but he wasn't superstitious about names. The operation consisted of a sawmill, equipment yard, and timber rights on 40,000 acres of federal forest. The previous owner had run it into debt trying to compete with larger companies, but Clyde had different plans. He wasn't interested in competing with the big logging corporations. He wanted to run a small, efficient operation that specialized in sustainable forestry and custom cutting, quality over quantity, craftsmanship over mass production. He hired 6 men to start, experienced loggers who'd been laid off when the big companies downsized. Men like himself who understood that trees were a renewable resource if you managed them properly. The work was hard but satisfying. Up before dawn, home after dark, every muscle aching from honest labor. No meetings, no presentations, no corporate politics, just trees and chainsaws and the ancient rhythm of forest work. Ruby visited that summer as promised. She arrived on a Greyhound bus wearing designer jeans and hiking boots that had never seen dirt. Clyde picked her up at the station in his work truck, still covered in sawdust from the day's cutting. Dad, she said, hugging him tight. You look good. You look like your mother, he said. It was true. Ruby had inherited Delilah's blonde hair and fine features, though her eyes were Clyde's dark brown. Is that bad? No, your mother was beautiful. Still is, probably. They drove to the logging camp in comfortable silence. Ruby stared out the window at the endless forest, the mountains rising like green walls on both sides of the valley. It's so quiet, she said. You'll get used to it. How far is the nearest town? 40 miles, population 800. What do people do for fun? Work, Clyde said. Fish, hunt, read books. Ruby laughed. You're serious. Dead serious. She worked for him that summer, running the office and helping with equipment maintenance. She learned to operate a forklift, to read timber contracts, to calculate board feet and profit margins. She also learned to appreciate the satisfaction of physical work and the beauty of undisturbed wilderness. I understand why you came here, she told him on her last night. It's like the rest of the world doesn't exist. That's the point, Clyde said. Will you ever come back? To visit you? Of course. I mean to live, to be part of normal society. Clyde considered the question while he cleaned his chainsaw. This is normal for me, Ruby. Always has been. I just forgot that for a while. She went back to college in September with dirt under her fingernails and calluses on her hands. She also went back with a better understanding of who her father was and why he'd made the choices he'd made. Clyde settled into the rhythm of his new life. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. No drama, no complications, no surprises. Until the phone call came on a Tuesday morning in October. Clyde, it's Maura Garrow. Hello, Maura. What can I do for you? I have some news about Julian Varnes. Clyde set down his coffee cup. I thought we were done with that situation. We are, but I thought you should know. Julian was arrested yesterday in Seattle. Sexual attack charges. Anyone I know? A paralegal at his new firm. Apparently he tried the same tactics that worked with Delilah. Tried? This one recorded their conversations. She also had witnesses. Julian's looking at serious prison time. Clyde was quiet for a moment. Why are you telling me this? Because there might be more charges coming. The authorities are reopening the cases from his previous jobs. If enough women come forward, he could be in prison for a long time. A very long time. Clyde thanked Maura for the information and hung up. He felt no satisfaction in Julian's downfall. No sense of vindication or justice served. Julian had destroyed himself, just as Delilah had destroyed herself. Clyde had simply stepped out of the way and let gravity do its work. He never heard about Julian again. Winter came early that year, blanketing the mountains in snow that wouldn't melt until April. The logging operations slowed during the worst months, but it never stopped completely. There was always equipment to maintain, contracts to negotiate, trees to mark for the spring cutting season. Clyde spent the long winter evenings reading technical manuals, forestry journals, the occasional novel. He learned about new cutting techniques, sustainable harvesting methods, equipment innovations that could improve safety and efficiency. He also learned that he was content. Not happy in the explosive, temporary way he'd been when he was young, but content in a deeper, more permanent sense. He'd found his place in the world, and it was exactly where he'd always belonged. Spring brought Ruby back for another visit, this time with her boyfriend, an earnest young man named David who studied renewable energy and worried about climate change. "Your father's operation is actually quite impressive," David told Ruby after Clyde had given him a tour of the sawmill. "He's practicing sustainable forestry at a level that most big companies only pretend to achieve." "Don't sound so surprised," Ruby said. "My dad's always been ahead of the curve." They stayed for a week. David learned to operate a chainsaw and helped with tree marking. Ruby ran the office and caught up with the local gossip. Who was getting married? Who was having babies? Who'd bought new equipment? On their last night, they sat around a campfire outside Clyde's cabin. Ruby had brought marshmallows from town, and they roasted them on sharpened sticks while David asked questions about forest management and carbon sequestration. "Have you talked to Mom lately?" Ruby asked during a lull in the conversation. "No," Clyde said. "Have you?" "She calls every few weeks. She's doing okay, I think. The job in Portland is working out." "Good. She asks about you sometimes. What do you tell her?" "That you're happy." Clyde poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. "Am I?" he asked. "You tell me." He thought about that for a moment. About the satisfaction of honest work, the beauty of undisturbed wilderness, the peace that came from living without drama or complication. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think I am." The next morning, he drove Ruby and David to the bus station in town. They hugged goodbye on the platform while the Greyhound idled nearby, exhaust visible in the cold morning air. "I love you, Dad," Ruby said. "Love you too, kiddo. Will you be okay up here by yourself?" "I'm not by myself. I've got trees." She laughed and climbed onto the bus. Clyde watched until it disappeared around the first curve, then drove back to work. The years passed quietly after that. Ruby graduated college and got a job with the Forest Service in Colorado. She married David in a small ceremony that Clyde attended, wearing his best suit and feeling proud of the strong, intelligent woman his daughter had become. Cascade Timber prospered under Clyde's management. The operation grew slowly and carefully, adding equipment and personnel only when the contracts justified the expansion. Clyde developed a reputation for quality work and fair dealing that brought him customers from across the Pacific Northwest. He also developed a reputation for being difficult to find. Reporters occasionally called, wanting to interview the man who'd humiliated Julian Varnes and destroyed Cascade Water Rights with a slideshow. Clyde never returned their calls. 5 years after leaving his old life behind, Clyde received an unexpected visitor. He was working late in the sawmill office when headlights appeared on the access road. The car was expensive, a black Mercedes that looked out of place among the logging trucks and pickup trucks in the equipment yard. Clyde watched from his office window as the driver got out. It was a woman he didn't recognize, professionally dressed and carrying a briefcase. She looked around the sawmill yard with obvious distaste before walking toward the office. "Mr. Falco?" she said when Clyde opened the door. "Depends who's asking." "My name is Patricia Morse. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Julian Varnes." Clyde felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Julian's dead?" "He died in prison last month. Self-destruction." They stood there in the doorway, lawyer and logger, while the information sank in. "What does that have to do with me?" Clyde asked finally. "Mr. Varnes left a letter. He asked that it be delivered to you personally." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. Clyde's name was written on the front in handwriting he didn't recognize, shaky, uncertain letters that looked like they'd been written by someone whose hands weren't quite steady. "I don't want it," Clyde said. "Nevertheless, I'm obligated to deliver it." She held out the envelope. Clyde stared at it for a long moment, then took it. "There's also a check," Patricia said. "Mr. Varnes had a small amount of money in a prison account. He left instructions that it should be sent to you." "How much?" $347. "Keep it," Clyde said. "Give it to his family or donate it to charity. I don't care." Patricia nodded and closed her briefcase. Is there anything you'd like me to tell the family about Mr. Varnus's final message to you? No. She walked back to her car and drove away, leaving Clyde standing in the office doorway with Julian's letter in his hand. He waited until he was alone in his cabin before opening it. The letter was short, written on prison stationery in that same shaky handwriting. Clyde, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to say this before I die. You were right about everything. I was a hunter, a manipulator, a man who used power to hurt people weaker than myself. I destroyed Delilah's marriage, her career, her life. I destroyed my own life. I destroyed the lives of women whose names you don't even know. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just telling you that I know what I was and I know what you did was justice. You could have eliminated me that night in the hotel lobby. You could have ruined me financially or professionally or personally. Instead, you let me ruin myself. That was the cruelest and most appropriate punishment you could have chosen. I hope you find peace in whatever life you've built for yourself. I hope Delilah finds peace too, though I doubt she will. Some things can't be forgiven even by time. Julian. Clyde read the letter twice, then walked to his wood stove and fed it to the flames. He watched Julian's final words curl and blacken and disappear into smoke. He felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sadness, no sense of closure. Julian Varnus had been a problem that solved itself. Nothing more. The next morning, Clyde was back to work as usual. Trees to cut, logs to mill, contracts to fulfill. The rhythm of honest labor that had sustained him for 5 years and would sustain him for however many years remained. Ruby called that evening to tell him she was pregnant. A girl, she said, her voice bright with excitement. Due in January. Congratulations, kiddo. How's David handling it? He's terrified and thrilled in equal measure. He keeps reading pregnancy books and asking if I need anything. Sounds like a good man. He is. You taught me to recognize the good ones. They talked for an hour about baby names and nursery colors and all the small preparations that came with bringing new life into the world. When they hung up, Clyde sat on his cabin porch and looked out at the mountains. A granddaughter, someone new to love, someone new to protect, someone new to teach about the difference between right and wrong. He thought about the world that little girl would inherit, a world full of Julian Varnuses and Delilahs, people who chose comfort over character, people who confused want with need. But it would also be a world full of honest workers and loving families and quiet mountains where a man could build something lasting. 6 months later, Clyde received one final communication from his old life. It wasn't a letter or a phone call. It was a newspaper clipping that Ruby had mailed to him, along with a note that said, "Thought you should see this." The clipping was from the Portland paper, a small item buried in the business section. Local woman dies in car accident. Delilah Falco, 42, formerly of Cascade Water Rights, died Tuesday when her car skidded off Highway 26 during a winter storm. Miss Falco had been working as a real estate assistant and was returning from a client meeting when the accident occurred. She is survived by her daughter Ruby and former husband Clyde. Services will be private. Clyde read the article 3 times, then set it aside. He walked outside and stood in the snow, breathing the clean mountain air and listening to the silence of the forest. Delilah was gone. The woman who'd shared his bed for 18 years, who'd betrayed him for a man in an expensive suit, who'd tried to destroy him when he refused to be destroyed. She was gone, and he was still here. He felt sorry for her in a distant way. Sorry that she'd never found whatever she'd been looking for when she chose Julian over their marriage. Sorry that she died alone on a dark highway, probably thinking about all the choices that had led her to that moment. But he didn't grieve for her. Grief was for people you loved, and he'd stopped loving Delilah the night he saw her hand moving under the table at that corporate party. He went inside and called Ruby. "I saw the article," he said when she answered. "I wasn't sure if I should send it," Ruby said. Her voice was thick with tears. "But I thought you had a right to know." "Thank you." "How are you doing?" "I don't know. She was my mother, but I'm not sure I really knew her anymore." "You knew the good parts. Focus on those." "Will you come to the service?" Clyde thought about that, about standing in a funeral home with people who'd known Delilah as she was at the end, broken, diminished, alone, about pretending to mourn a woman whose choices had destroyed everything they'd built together. "No," he said. "That's not my place anymore. I understand. but I'll come see you and the baby as soon as the road's clear. Ruby's daughter was born on a cold February morning, 8 pounds and 6 ounces of perfect possibility. They named her Sarah after Clyde's mother, and she had Ruby's blonde hair and David's gentle eyes. Clyde held his granddaughter for the first time in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and hope. She was so small, so fragile, so completely dependent on the adults in her life to make the right choices. "She's beautiful," he told Ruby. "She looks like you," David said. Same serious expression. Clyde smiled. "She's thinking about all the trees she's going to climb." As he held Sarah, Clyde thought about the future, about the world this little girl would inherit, the challenges she'd face, the choices she'd have to make. He thought about the lessons he could teach her, about the value of honest work, about the importance of keeping your word, about the difference between love and possession. He thought about the story he'd never tell her, about her grandmother's betrayal and destruction, about the night everything changed in a hotel ballroom, about the price of choosing comfort over character. Some stories were too heavy for children to carry. Sarah would learn about her grandmother from Ruby, would hear about the good times and the happy memories. She would never need to know about chainsaws and divorce papers and Julian Varnes dying alone in a prison cell. That was Clyde's burden to carry, and he was strong enough to bear it. The drive back to the mountains took 4 hours through winding roads and falling snow. Clyde made it home just as the storm hit in earnest. Whiteout conditions that would last for 3 days. He spent those days in his cabin, maintaining his equipment and planning the spring cutting season. He also thought about Sarah, about the kind of grandfather he wanted to be, about the legacy he wanted to leave. On the third night, as the storm finally began to clear, Clyde sat by his fire and made a decision. He would expand the logging operation, build something that could last for generations, something he could pass down to Ruby and David, something they could pass down to Sarah. A family business built on honest work and sustainable practices, a place where integrity mattered more than profit. It would take time and money and careful planning, but Clyde had learned patience over the years. He'd learned that the best revenge wasn't destruction. It was building something better than what had been destroyed. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow covering the mountains like a clean slate. Clyde loaded his truck with equipment and drove to the cutting site, ready to begin another day of honest work. As he fired up his chainsaw and approached the first tree, he thought about the chain of events that had brought him to this moment. The betrayal that had ended his marriage, the revenge that had destroyed his enemies, the decision to walk away and build something new. He thought about Delilah, alone on that dark highway, paying the final price for choices that had seemed so clever at the time. He thought about Julian, dying in a prison cell with nothing but regret for company. He thought about Ruby and David and little Sarah, the future he was working to secure. The saw roared to life, cutting clean and true through the heartwood. The tree fell exactly where Clyde intended it to fall, crashing down through the forest with the sound of justice finally served. He walked to the next tree, started his saw, and kept working. In the distance, smoke rose from the chimney of his cabin, a signal to anyone who might be watching that Clyde Falco was home, that he'd found his place in the world, that he was exactly where he belonged. The fire in the pines burned clean and steady, warming a good man's house while he worked to build something lasting from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The end.